Right, class is in session. Welcome back. Dark Side of the Black Panther Party and the Rise of Black Feminism video. You'll know that, I don't shy away from anyone, anything, anybody can get got, right? Because, we are in a state right now, particularly Black America, but America as a whole. We are in a state right now where we are drowning in a pool of confusion and misconception. The title of this live stream is The Second Death of Malcolm X. See, what I am beginning now is something that I am referring to as the death series, And this is the first installment of the death series. And why I'm calling this the death series is we're going to deconstruct the legacy and everything involved with certain individuals who are commonly heralded and referred to as heroes, as fighters for the greater good and the cause for psychologism. And it is a word that pretty much means the explanation or interpretation of events or ideas in psychological terms. Simple as that, right? If you want to know what psychologism means in a broader sense, or in the sense that how I refer to the term psychologism previously, go and check out my video on the philosophical roots of fascism. Also, how many of y'all are familiar with this piece of literature right here? This right here, of course, is the autobiography of Malcolm X as told by Alex Haley. So this is the autobiography of Malcolm X. And we're going to deal with Malcolm X today. Remember, I told y'all nobody's off limits and everybody can get it. All right. Because there are a lot of misconceptions about Malcolm X. We don't know, much about Malcolm X beyond what we saw in the film. And, perhaps maybe what we read from this, because Spike Lee, the film that Spike Lee directed that was released in 1992, it was derived almost solely from this book. And I have been extremely critical of Malcolm X in the past. And I have people who have come to me, who support me, who agree with me by and large, but they have pushed back on me when I have went after Malcolm. They've said, well, nah, man, Malcolm began to change his life towards the end. He was evolving. He was changing. Was he changing? Okay. And if he was in fact changing, what was he changing into? How was his philosophy in fact evolving? We're going to break that down. I want to read a quote from Malcolm. This is Malcolm on January 19th, 1965. For those of you who don't know or can't remember off the top of your head, Malcolm X was assassinated, I believe it was February 21st, 1965. So he would be assassinated about a month after he made this statement. And he says, and I quote, "I believe there will ultimately be a clash between the oppressed and those who do the oppressing. I believe there will be a clash between those who want freedom, justice, equality for everyone, and those who want to continue the systems of exploitation. I believe there will be that kind of clash, but I don't think it will be based upon skin color." So Malcolm was changing, right? He began to embrace the brotherhood of all men, to quote my man's Jamal in the film House Party 2, after he made his Hajj to Mecca, which was in 1964, I believe it was. Let me check, because I wrote the exact date down. Malcolm left for his Hajj to Mecca on April 13th, 1964, where he abandoned the teachings of Elijah Muhammad and officially became a Sunni Muslim. And of course, he was dead not a year after he made his Hajj. So let's ask the question, from the time Malcolm made his Hajj to when he was assassinated, what was his beliefs during that 9 or 10 month stretch? We're going to get to the bottom of it. But before we do that, let's get to the root of what the beliefs of the Nation of Islam in fact are. And then we're going to, once again, go full circle and ask ourselves, how much did Malcolm change from the time he converted and became a Sunni Muslim and he was assassinated not a year after, and the teachings of Elijah Muhammad? Now, I know y'all remember when LeBron James showed up at the press conference and he had a copy of this book in his hand to show y'all that he had been reading it, and the reporters asked Queen James what he had learned from that book. It's just crazy. It's just deep, man. Just a lot of things that he was going through, man. Just a lot of that stuff still going on. Man. I couldn't tell if the motherfucker actually read the book or not, but we gonna go over it. All right. Trust me. Don't leave it up to LeBron James to break down the autobiography of Malcolm X for you. So, like I said, I can't go through the whole book, but I just want to go through a couple of key parts. All right. Because when we think about the Nation of Islam, of course, we think about Minister Farrakhan, we think about Malcolm, we even think about Elijah. But the man who, of course, educated or taught Elijah, the so-called founder of the Nation of Islam, is a man by the name of Wallace Farad Muhammad, or W.D. Farad, he's commonly referred to as. Okay. Now, Elijah teaches that the greatest and mightiest God who appeared on earth was Master W.D. Farad. He came from the east to the west, appearing in North America at a time when the history and the prophecy that is written was coming to realization, as the non-white people all over the world began to rise, and as the devil white civilization, condemned by Allah, was through its devilish nature destroying itself. So Farad is approaching. He appeared mysteriously in North America at a time when, according to what Elijah Muhammad is dictating to his followers, that the devilish white civilization was beginning to destroy itself. So white civilization was coming to an end at this point. He goes on when he's speaking about Farad Muhammad. He says, Master Farad Muhammad. Now check this out now. Now check how he rationalizes this, because we remember what the Nation of Islam taught and perhaps what they're still teaching about the white man and so on and so forth. If you all have ever seen a photograph of Farad Muhammad, there's one particular photograph of Farad Muhammad that you see if you would just do a Google image search. There's this one image of him and it looks as though he's peering down and looking at a piece of literature or a book. But there aren't many photographs out there of Farad Muhammad, but he's clearly not Negroid or Africoid in appearance. He looks very pale. He looks white. Now, Elijah Muhammad says this of Farad Muhammad. Farad was half black and half white. So the founder of the Nation of Islam, Farad Muhammad, was half white. But the white man is the devil. Now, you can try to reconcile that, but I'll tell you what Elijah says. He says, he was made this way to enable him to be accepted by black people in America and to lead them, while at the same time he was enabled to move undiscovered amongst white people so that he can understand and judge the enemies of the blacks. Wallace Farad in 1931, posing as a seller of silks, met in Detroit, Michigan, Elijah Muhammad. Master W.D. Farad gave to Elijah Muhammad Allah's message and Allah's divine guidance to save the lost found Nation of Islam, the so-called Negroes who were here in the wilderness of North America. Now, there's another piece of literature, man, that I want to look for that I couldn't find. It's another important book that, is one of those must reads for, particularly a lot of my, my black righteous type folks. And that is Elijah Muhammad's book, Message to the Black Man. And you'll get a clear cut vision and picture of the Nation of Islam's theology when you read Message to the Black Man. And I'm going to be citing for Message of the Black Man from memory because I don't have a physical copy of that book. But I'm still going from the autobiography of Malcolm X. It goes on. Mr. W.D. Farad taught that the Negroes in America were directly descended from Muslims. He taught that Negroes in America were lost sheep, lost for 400 years from the Nation of Islam, and that he, Mr. Farad, had come to redeem and return the Negro to his true religion. Now check this out. Now here's where it gets deep. Elijah goes on. No heaven was in the sky, Mr. Farad taught, and no hell was in the ground. Instead, both heaven and hell were conditions in which people lived right here on planet Earth. Mr. Farad taught that the Negro in America had been for 400 years in hell. And he, Mr. Farad, had come to return them to where to where heaven for them was, back home among their own kind. Now, isn't that deep? And I don't know if you bright and you intuitive and you seeing it, you're understanding, you may be in your mind doing a bit of foreshadowing here, particularly if you saw the film, because what was Malcolm, played by Denzel Washington, of course, being told when he was being indoctrinated into the ways of the Nation of Islam when he was in prison. He was saying, wait a minute, if you want to know, in fact, that the Bible is a legitimate, an accurate and valid document, look at the world around you, because everything that the Bible is talking about is happening here today. It's what he was being taught in prison. Remember what we learned. Now, remember there was a scene, and I'm gonna read it from this book. There was a scene in in the film Malcolm X, where Denzel's character, Malcolm X being played by Denzel Washington, he's out street preaching on a soapbox, and he's telling people, why are you following the white man's God, right? Because the white man is stealing, or should I say, he has his heaven on earth while you are going through hell because you are worshiping his God. So the Nation of Islam was teaching that heaven was, or should I say, the white man's earthly existence was, in fact, his heaven. Master Farrar taught that hell was on earth. Also on earth was the devil, the white race, which was bred from black, the original man, 6,000 years ago, purposely to create a hell on earth for the next 6,000 years. The black people, God's children, were gods themselves, Master Farrar taught, and he taught that among them was also a human being like the others, who was the God of gods, the most high, the supreme being, supreme in wisdom and power, and his proper name was Allah. Now Elijah Muhammad would say in Message to the Black Man that by way of the terms that are being used by the white man and his God and his religion, which would of course be Christianity, First, Elijah Muhammad undermined the doctrine of the Trinity by stating that there is no way that one being could be three things. Now, I know that there are denominations and sects within Christianity itself that denies the doctrine of the Trinity. That's a conversation for another day. But Elijah Muhammad said that by simple mathematics, 3 does not go into 1. So there's no way that God could be 3. Also, Elijah Muhammad stated that if man is made in the likeness of God's own image, and the original man is a man of color, then God too must be black. And seeing as how human beings are not spirits, then the true and living God, he who created man, in a sense, must also be human. And of course, he must also be black. The doctrine of the God within. I'm going to do a whole nother lecture on that by itself. All right. But we're going to move on here. And this is the words of Malcolm. And then I'm done with the autobiography of Malcolm X. Here we have, this is Malcolm. Brothers and sisters, this is Malcolm. The white man has brainwashed us black people to fasten our gaze upon a blonde-haired, blue-eyed Jesus. We're worshiping a Jesus that doesn't even look like us. Oh, yes. Now, just bear with me. Listen to the teachings of the messenger of Allah, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. Now, just think of this. The blonde-haired, blue-eyed white man has taught you and me to worship a white Jesus and to shout and sing and pray to this God. That's his God, the white man's God. The white man has taught us to shout and sing and pray until we die, to wait until death for some starry heaven in the hereafter while we're dead. While the white man has his milk and honey in the streets paved with golden dollars right here on this earth. You don't want to believe what I'm telling you, brothers and sisters. Well, I'll tell you what you do. You go out here, you just take a look around where you live and look not only how you live, but look at how anyone that you know lives that way. You'll be sure that you're not just a bad luck accident. And when you get through looking at where you live, then you take a walk down across Central Park and start to look at this white God it had brought to the white man. Look at what the white God brought to the white man. I mean, take yourself down there at take a look at how the white man is living. So what Malcolm is saying, what he was saying back then, is that the white man's worship in the white man, or the white man's worship in his white God, his white Jesus, or the very conception of Christianity in general, not just the graven image of Jesus Christ. He's saying that it is their belief that has, right, facilitated their earthly treasures. So the white man has some kind of Creflo Dollar, TD Jakes kind of prosperity gospel thing happening. That's what Malcolm is suggesting here. And he goes on, and I'm done with this. And don't stop there. In fact, you won't be able to stop for long. His doorman is going to tell you to move on, but catch a subway and keep on downtown. Anywhere you may want to get off, look at the white man's apartments, his businesses. Go right up down to the tip of Manhattan. To this devilish white man stole the land that the devilish white man stole from the trusting Indians for $24. Look at his city hall down there. Look at his Wall Street. Look yourself. Look at his God. The Nation of Islam's doctrine is not a spiritual or a theological doctrine. It is a political doctrine. And what, in fact, is Farad, Elijah, and Malcolm, what are they championing? They are championing, once again, it is given the veneer of something godly and theological. But what they are talking about, is what I talked about last time. And it goes back to that man, to Karl Marx. Because Karl Marx, once again, he took metaphysical doctrines and he politicized them, or he came up with a socio-political doctrine to sort of explain what he referred to as his dialectical historicism, or his understanding of the movement of history. So when you hear Elijah and Malcolm talking about the material world being the example as to sort of how we as observers, how we understand the divine, our knowledge of the divine comes by way of our senses, in that how it is that we observe material conditions. Because Malcolm and Elijah are denying the existence, or should I say, de-emphasizing the meaning of spirit, by suggesting, of course, that God is not merely a spirit, i.e. a mystery, because by definition, the mystery is unknown, but a mystery, or should I say that God is in fact a man who created man in his image, which was, of course, the black man. The white man is merely a perversion of the original man, which goes into the Nation of Islam in their doctrine of Yaqub, which I don't feel the need to get into. But I want to do a recap, and I want to read again, my brother. I want to read again, dialectical materialism. Keep in mind what I was just talking about when I was breaking down what Malcolm X was saying, and Elijah. Dialectical materialism is a philosophical approach to reality derived from the writings of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. For Marx and Engels, materialism meant the material world perceptible to the senses has objective reality independent of mind or spirit. They did not deny the reality of mental or spiritual processes, but affirmed that ideas could arise, therefore, only as products and reflections of material conditions. So when Elijah Muhammad, Malcolm X, and the rest of them, when they are suggesting to you that heaven does not exist in the hereafter, heaven is a condition that exists on earth, they are expressing to you a paganized sort of form of what Marx and Engels created, called dialectical materialism. Because knowledge can only be gained by way of what is perceptible to the senses. So the white man must be the devil. He has to be, right? Because that is what your senses is telling you when you observe the white man's material conditions and you juxtapose them to the living conditions of the average black man. The white man must be the devil because he's to blame for everything that is going wrong in the world. Because the devil is not something supernatural. The devil is a worldly phenomenon that can be perceived with the senses. Y'all don't hear me, dog. I don't even know if you ever thought about the teachings of Elijah Muhammad in this way and juxtaposed it, or should I say compared it to the writings of Karl Marx, but they're the same. Because I'm going to tell you, I'm going to just cut to the chase and I'm going to tell you flat out. Because, see, a lot of conservatives, I see you and I hear you. You always talk about, and you like to troll liberals because you like to talk about how Malcolm warned the black man about the white liberal, about to warn black people about liberals. But let me tell y'all something, conservatives, when y'all do that. And I ain't saying, I mean, because I use people's words and people's quotes, and I don't agree with everything they say. But if they said something right at the moment, I'll make reference to them, okay? But you all are taking Malcolm's words out of context, because when he warns blacks about liberals, he's not warning them from some politically conservative perspective. He chided liberals because he believed that liberals were co-opting the revolutionary fervor of blacks in America, because liberalism was getting blacks to buy into the system of incrementalism and reform, because Malcolm X was a radical leftist. And all radical leftists, those who have integrity, and I will give this bit to Malcolm. Malcolm had integrity in that he was honest about what he believed in, and he flat out told you. A lot of the radicals from back during that time period, the 1950s, 1960s, right? They were entering into the realm of, right, the sort of conventional political the sort of conventional political polemic of the liberal and the conservative, and they went under the banner of the liberal, when in fact they were radical Marxist revolutionaries. And Malcolm said, no, because the liberals are trying to co-opt the black man. He didn't have any kind of warm-eyed, doughy-eyed feelings about American conservatives either. He just didn't like the fact that a lot of blacks were moving over to the Democrat Party. But Malcolm didn't like that because Malcolm was a leftist. Let me also, I'm going to harken back, I'm going to make reference to, once again, another one of my intellectual mentors. I've never met him personally, but of course that is the great David Horowitz. David Horowitz said, and of course David Horowitz, this was the man who just completely gave up on his Marxist beliefs after the death of Betty Van Patter. I covered this in another live stream as well, or not live stream, in another YouTube video also. The death of Betty Van Patter. But David Horowitz was beginning to pull back from the left even before that happened, because he didn't like the tactics that the left were employing, because he was not an Alinskyite, meaning that he didn't believe in lying to get his way. Because one of the old chants were, what do we want? Revolution. When do we want it? Now. David Horowitz was like, if Marxism is good for America, then let's go out, right, in good faith and make the case. Because if Marxism is in fact the way, then why do we have to lie? Why can't we just be honest? And David Horowitz, when asked, David Horowitz said, we hated liberals, the new left. We hated liberals back then. And in an interview, David Horowitz was asked, why do you hate liberals? David Horowitz said, we hated them because they were liberal. That's why we hated them, because we believed that liberals were co-opting the revolution. Because a lot of these, revolution, when do we want it? When do we want it now? They all went off and they all became assemblymen and mayors and governors and congressmen, and, members of the Black Panther Party would go off and run for office, and, right? They would run for office, many of them, right, on the Democrat ticket. They all became Democrat politicians. In a nutshell, again, the theory of knowledge Marx and Engels started from the materialist premise that all knowledge is derived from the senses. So remember the scene when Denzel is in the prison and he's telling him, stop thinking about the Bible in that way. Apply it to life. Apply it to not just life in a morally archetypal way, but apply it to life in terms of how you perceive of what is coming in through your senses. What do you see? who has been the people that have been abusing you all your life? Remember that? And he had a flashback of the white women that he dated. He had a flashback of the white teacher. He had a flashback of the Ku Klux Klan when they murdered his father and set his father on the railroad tracks, murdered his dad. And mind you, listen, I get Malcolm, it was a different time. And I get it and I understand. And I give Malcolm grace because he was from a different time. But I'm saying to you, some of you, we don't live in that time anymore. And many of you still think like Malcolm thought, because do not think that what Malcolm was proposing would not have resulted in something far worse than what was actually taking place, because what is bad can actually get worse, right? And I'm going to explain it, because he's going back in his mind and he's saying, wait a minute, everybody that I never know that ever done me wrong was white. So the white man must be the devil, because that was his material life. That was his actual experience. Next thing, the doctrine of dialectical materialism of Marx is tantamount, or it is kin, or it can be compared almost thought for thought, word for word, with Marx and Engels' philosophy of dialectical materialism. Now we're going to move on, because a lot of people have been saying that, well, Malcolm X changed during the latter part of his life. Well, I'm going to tell you, in many respects, yeah, Malcolm may have changed, but Malcolm became more dangerous. And when I say he became more dangerous, see, people say, when Malcolm became an internationalist, oh man, I let the cat out the bag. When Dr. King became an internationalist, he became a threat to the powers that be. But I got news for some of y'all now. Because when y'all talk about the powers that be, you separate yourself. You say, well, that ain't me. We talking about the United States government, or the big banks, big oil, big pharma, this and that. It's always these larger than life entities, right, that have all this control over our lives. So when you think that somebody is a threat to the powers that be, you think that, well, that ain't me. They ain't a threat. You know, if Malcolm is a threat to the powers that be, that must mean that he's, what Malcolm believes is good for me, because I don't like the powers that be either. I got a problem with them. So Malcolm changed at the end of his life. Okay. So y'all remember when Colin Kaepernick wore that T-shirt to Miami? Huh? When he was still in the league, but he was benched at the time, and he was going with his kneeling, his whole protest thing he was doing. And remember, he wore the shirt with Malcolm X and Fidel Castro to the game in Miami, of all places, right? Heavily Cuban population. And he was asked by a Cuban reporter, I don't know if he was from the Miami Herald or where he was from, but he said, man, why are you wearing that shirt? Do you realize who Fidel Castro is? And Colin Kaepernick pushed back and he ignored. He said, well, this is to commemorate Malcolm X. He said, but I know, but he's sitting next to Fidel Castro. But whatever, this for Malcolm X. This ain't about, I don't want to talk about, this is for Malcolm. And he kept pushing back on him. And then what did Colin Kaepernick do? Eventually, he started to defend Fidel Castro, talked about the educational system and the health care and so on and so forth. Because why Cuba is a monumental failure, of course, is the fault of the United States, not the Cuban regime. But I want to talk about that meeting. The meeting between Fidel Castro and Malcolm X took place in 1960. I'm going to give a little backdrop into what took place at that meeting and what that meeting was all about, all right? Now, this was a meeting. Fidel Castro and some of his delegates, they came to New York. This is a magazine. This is an article in Slate magazine. And a lot of this information came from a book that was written by a journalist. I'll have his name in a second, but the book he wrote was entitled Fidel and Malcolm X. That's the name of the book. Okay. Now, the Castro meeting illustrates, this is the writer for Slate. Let's see when this article was published. This is a fairly recent article. This article was published in 2016, written by Rebecca Onion. Okay. Now, the Castro meeting illustrates Malcolm X's internationalism. Now, we're going to break down the concept of internationalism, right? An important aspect of his activism in the last half of his life that scholars argue have been unfairly cropped out of popular representations of his biography. So, of course, this is Slate, right? Keep in mind what we're talking about. So they cut that out of Malcolm X's legacy to the chagrin of this writer, okay? Now, what happened at this meeting? The meeting took place at a hotel called the Teresa Hotel. Was a black-owned hotel in Harlem. All right. Castro came to New York in September 1960 for the 15th session of the General Assembly of the United Nations. The insipid chilliness of the U.S.-Cuba relationship affected the conditions of his visit. He and his delegation were restricted to the island of Manhattan. After initially taking up residence in the Shelbourne Hotel in Midtown, the Cuban delegation found itself temporarily homeless when the manager apparently asked the Cubans to deposit a $20,000 security fee in cash in order to continue to stay there. So they ran out of money. Malcolm stepped in. He said, I got you, Fidel. Come to the Teresa. It was his idea. It was Malcolm's idea for Castro to come to the Teresa. He relayed to the Cuban delegation via the activist group Fair Play for Cuba Committee. All right. Now, I'm going to read on here. It says, Castro, this is the writer Rebecca Onion defining in her own words the feelings of Fidel Castro when he found out about Malcolm's invitation. He says, Castro leapt at the concept, seeing a chance to bolster his argument that Black Americans should support the new Cuba, where he promised Afro-Cubans would be lifted out of their historical oppression. The reaction in Harlem was ecstatic. They were happy, unprecedented. No foreign government leader had ever considered lodging in Harlem. This was, this was awesome, right? But there was some community leaders who protested the visit. One being Adam Clayton Powell Jr. said the Negro, pretty much, we don't need those problems. We got our own problems, right? Fidel Castro, he's too. He's a menace. He's too, he's political poison. We don't want to have anything to do with Fidel Castro, right? I'm gonna read the transcript from what was overheard being said between Fidel and Malcolm. Castro's first words was inaudible. Couldn't hear what he said, but Malcolm replied to whatever it was that Fidel said. He said, "Downtown for you, it was ice. Uptown, it is warm." You know what that? So what was he saying? So when you was downtown in Shelbourne in Midtown, they didn't want you there. But uptown in Harlem, we welcome you. Then then Fidel says, yes, very warm here. It's warm. Now, the Muslim leader, ever the militant, says, I think you will find the people in Harlem are not so addicted to the propaganda they put out downtown. So Malcolm is saying, don't worry, the black people, all that shit they say about you, Fidel, we don't believe that shit. That's American propaganda. Don't even worry about it, bruh. You good over here. All right? In bad English, Fidel says, I admire this. I have seen how it is possible for propaganda to make changes in people. Your people live here and are faced with this propaganda all the time, and yet they understand. This is very interesting. Malcolm replies, there are 20 million of us, and we always understand. So here you have Colin Kaepernick in 2016 still feel the need to, it's okay. I can wear a shirt with Fidel Castro's photograph on it. Hell, to even wear a shirt with Malcolm X's photograph on it may be questionable, given what I'm about to tell you if it hasn't soured you already. Let me also tell you. I'm going to tell y'all what his name is. Y'all know who he is, because did you know that Malcolm had a meeting set up with this man that never came to pass? Malcolm and Castro would never meet again. However, Malcolm was supposed to meet with Che Guevara in December 1964 when Guevara was in New York to address the UN. But due to threats from right-wing Cuban groups in the United States, Guevara was forced to cancel his visit to Harlem. The Malcolm X Castro meeting kicked off a series of meetings held at the Teresa in Harlem where Castro would meet with a laundry list of reprobates. He met with Nikita Khrushchev. He was the leader of Soviet Russia at the time. Gamal Abdel Nasser of the United Arab Republic, and India's Prime Minister. I'm not even going to try to pronounce that first name. Nehru. Of course, India was a socialist country as well at the time. We see India now, in many respects, is prospering, right? It goes on. Castro was not invited to a luncheon given by Dwight D. Eisenhower. He was the president at the time, right? For other Latin American leaders, he put together some counter-programming, a lunch for the Hotel Teresa's working class black employees. So here we have Fidel pandering to the black working class employees at the Teresa, yada, yada, yada. I'm going to read. This is the article I found for Vibe magazine, right? So we all know the hip hop magazine, right? Vibe, right? This is the shit that gets disseminated, right? Because like my homeboy Chad O. Jackson, we talking about this whole thing about black identity, because black identity and struggle, those two things have become synonymous. And we don't know how to get that shit up, because the only thing we know how to do is struggle and fucking complain, right? We don't know how to live life, overcome. We just want to stay mired in this BS. But this because these are heroes, all right? This is a quote from Malcolm. The Teresa is best known as the place where Fidel Castro went during his UN visit and achieved a psychological coup over the U.S. State Department when it confined him to Manhattan, never dreaming that he'd stay uptown in Harlem and make such an impression amongst the Negroes. Now, this is Fidel Castro in 1990, reflecting on Malcolm's political legacy. I'm going to read to you what Fidel Castro said about Malcolm in 1990. We have always been in solidarity with the struggle of black people. Now, if you know anything about the Castros and Che Guevara and their attitudes towards blacks, I'm going to just leave it at that. I know who Blanche Robinson is, right? His Instagram handle is He Is Blanche. And in a recent live stream he did, you know, he was being humorous, but he wasn't playing. He talking about how, man, black people, we so low down, man. Black people we gonna usher in the Antichrist. And what he meant is, this is how they keep using us. This is Fidel Castro. This is 1990. It's no secret of what Cuba is and what it has become. This is 1990. We have always been in solidarity with the struggle of black people, of minorities and the poor in the United States. We have always been in solidarity with them, and they have been in solidarity with us. We must fight to defeat the campaigns, the schemes, and the lies, all that are aimed at separating us. I think that in these times, we need that friendship more than ever, and we need your solidarity more than ever, and we fully appreciate it, because we understand that one has to be very courageous to support Cuba in the United States. I wonder, was Fidel Castro singing this same song in 1962 when he threatened to nuke the United States? And he said that, matter of fact, Fidel will go on to say that I don't even give a damn if that results in the destruction of Cuba. I will sacrifice the entire country for the cause of taking down the United States. Yeah. Fidel Castro was about to nuke your ass in 1962 at the behest of Soviet Russia until my man, I'm going to call him my man's, but JFK made that phone call to Nikita Khrushchev and told him, hey, Nick, reel your dog in. Because, you don't know about the Cuban Missile Crisis, just go and look it up, all right? Just go and look it up. But just ask yourself, did Fidel Castro give a damn about black folk when he was finna nuke your ass back in 1962? Cuba has an important role to play, a very big responsibility, because there were people who thought that the revolution would collapse just like socialism in Europe. But of course, this country will resist. We are waging three great battles: the political battle, where we maintain the unity of the people, the support of the people, the determination of our people; the economic battle, which is even more here than elsewhere, given the conditions we face; and the battle for defense. Was Cuba struggling with economic? Was Cuba having all these struggles prior to? Huh? Yeah, Batista. Yeah, he was brutal. Yeah, Batista was tyrannical. He was Fidel Castro's predecessor, and the United States supported the Batista regime until they couldn't support him any longer. Don't get it twisted. The Cuban Revolution was allowed to happen. When Fidel Castro was brought to the United States shortly after the Cuban Revolution of 1959, he was asked, and you can go and look this up on YouTube, you may be able to find it. He was asked out in the open on camera, is he in fact a communist? He said no. They asked him again, what about your brother? He said no. He said, but what about your sister? I think it was his sister-in-law, his brother's wife or something. Anybody you know or anyone around you, are you a communist? Do you plan on having this communist country in the Western Hemisphere right on the border or right next door to the southern border of the United States? He said no. And well, we all know how that turned out. He lied. Because Fidel Castro had visions and dreams of destroying the United States ever since he was a teenager. It's in his letters. We have to work in 3 directions, but we are not doing this for ourselves. We are doing it for all those just causes of the world. At a time of skepticism, optimism, and the hope of the people will again be born because the negative forces will not prevail. Happy, because this was on Malcolm X's birthday. Happy born day, Malcolm. May you rest in freedom. Oh, ain't that sweet, Fidel? May you rest in freedom. Now we get to the juicy part. Because he met Fidel in 1960. I know what a lot of y'all are thinking. Man, it's 1960, bro. I mean, Malcolm died in 65. Y'all, we all say that Malcolm was making changes. Here's a book. Mind you, I pulled this out, I had to dust it off, put it out of my collection. I had to go through it. This book was written by George Brittman. George Brittman, I think he has multiple books written about Malcolm X. This book, I know y'all can't see it because it's probably coming in backwards. It's titled The Last Year of Malcolm X, The Evolution of a Revolutionary. And I'm going to be quoting and citing from this book because what happened is, and this is part of the beef, the split between Malcolm and Elijah, because Malcolm was he was becoming very frustrated with the nation. He was becoming very frustrated with Elijah. Why? Because Elijah was trying to reel Malcolm in, not just solely due to jealousy of Malcolm was becoming too popular. He was becoming the titular head of the Nation of Islam and so on and so forth. Malcolm was about action. Malcolm was about business. Malcolm was saying to Elijah, saying, man, listen, dog. We can't keep telling people all this we can't keep selling them this shit if we ain't doing nothing. Right? So when people start saying, well, Malcolm and they are black separatists. They were black separatists. But Malcolm changed and became an internationalist. What implications does that have for the United States and the wider world? We're going to find out. Because Malcolm was always about political activism just as much, if not more so, than he was about his theological and religious life and commitments. Because he was like, man, Elijah, y'all ain't really about this life. Y'all remember when chickens coming home to roost? Elijah told him, man, too many people love JFK to work. They love that man. You better not say nothing about JFK. Malcolm went right out there and said, sounds seem like chickens coming home to roost to me. And that's when they put that punishment on his ass, because Malcolm was more convicted, right? It's like Elijah was, he indoctrinated him too good. Because Malcolm was so committed to what he thought was right, what he thought was true. And Elijah was like, man, I mean, it's like, I mean that shit, bro, but I ain't talking about kicking some fucking ass, but I ain't trying to overthrow the United States. You want to know why? Because Elijah was getting money. They had enterprises, businesses. Hey, you about to fuck up the apple cart, man, we getting money. Malcolm said, fuck that, I thought we was about a vision of resurrecting the... We ain't want that smoke. Elijah didn't want that smoke, but Malcolm wanted it. Malcolm said, all right, fine then, I'm out. And for all the other reasons, we know about what happened between Malcolm and Elijah. Now, here's the book. Now, quote, now keep in mind now, Malcolm went on his Hajj. When did he go on his Hajj? Let me remind y'all. He left for the United States. I don't know when he arrived in Mecca. It may have been the next day or whatever. And while he was on his Hajj, he visited all kinds of places. But he left for his Hajj on April 13th, 1964. He was assassinated on February 21st, 1965. Not even a full year. So Malcolm changed, right? Okay, we're going to find out if he changed. When Malcolm set out to build a new movement, he had to face the task of working out its relations and attitudes towards other forces in this country and abroad. That is, to determine who his allies and potential allies were. Numerically, black people are a minority in the United States, between 1/10 and 1/9. This creates conditions strategically and tactically different from those in countries where blacks are the majority and affects both thought and action about alliances and allies. The one that is most widespread, it was originated by the propagandists. These are the words of George Brittman. Propagandists for the ruling class has the blessings of the government and is accepted and propounded by all the moderate Negro leaders. And it goes on. Since Negroes are a minority of 10 or 11% at the time, the odds are against them. They must recognize that they cannot get equality or significant concessions in that direction until they get acquiescence and support of another 40% or more of the nation, that is the whites, who range for most part to liberal to conservative. Now, herein lies the problem. So what is George Brittman saying, and how is he relating it to Malcolm? Let me see how much power I got on my phone. I'm gonna let y'all stay as long as I can. Check this out now. What Brittman is saying, he's saying that the American political paradigm of left and right, liberal versus conservative, is not conducive to what it is the black man should truly be fighting for. And he's saying the white people not going to back us up on it, because in order for us, black people, only 10% of the population, we need more allies, and the white folk, they ain't going to go for that. They ain't going to go for that, okay? So what was the solution? All black organization, black leadership, effective self-defense against racist violence, black political action outside the two-party system. Keep in mind, conservatives, do what you want. I ain't here to tell nobody what to do. And I think I've done it in the past. But I'm like, man, forget all that, bro. Stop citing and quoting Malcolm in order to make an attempt to make liberals look like. I know why you're doing it. Because many of the people who talk all that, I'm blackity black, that old, what was my man's character in that movie? Anyway, but I mean, all the blackity blacks out there.
Black, y'all.
I'm black, y'all. I'm blackity black, and I'm black, y'all. I'm biggly black. All them bliggly black motherfuckers. They see, when it comes to Democrats, when it comes to American liberals, right? They dumb, deaf, and blind. These may have strong appeal to the Negro masses, but they are out of question because white liberals and conservatives do not like them. There are two schools of thought among American Negroes. This is Malcolm. Now, these are the words of Malcolm. In a speech he gave on April 8th, 1964, shortly before he left. It reads, their thinking is usually domestic, confined to the boundaries of America, and they always look upon themselves as a minority. He's talking about the Negro in America, black people. When they look upon themselves upon the American stage is a white stage. So the black man standing on that stage in America automatically is the minority, whereas other sections of America known as the black nationalists don't look upon themselves as Americans. They look upon themselves as part of the dark mankind. Y'all see where this is going? And they see the whole struggle, not within the confines of the American stage, but they look upon the struggle of the world stage. Oh, now it's starting to come in the picture. And in the world context, they see that the dark man outnumbers the white man. On the world stage, the white man is just a microscopic minority. These different ways of viewing the majority-minority question produce different attitudes. This is George Brittman. Now, he's going back to Malcolm's words. He is the underdog, and he is in his struggle, he always uses an approach that is begging, hat in hand, compromising approach. Got it? Okay. But the Afro-American with the international outlook uses a different approach in trying to struggle for his rights. He doesn't beg. He doesn't thank you for what you give him because you are only giving him what he should have had 100 years ago. He doesn't think you are doing him any favors. So the internationalist approach is justified and should be cultivated if only because the superiority of its psychological results. Black people who think internationally for a majority rather than a minority angle tend to acquire higher morale, greater self-reliance, more militancy and tenacity, precisely the qualities that fighters for freedom need and that the communications and educational media discourage. But Malcolm's internationalism did not rely solely on its psychological byproducts. That's Brittman. Now I'm going to read Malcolm's words again. Now these words, this was said at a rally for the Organization of Afro-American Unity in December 13th, 1964. This was after he made his Hajj. Now, I'm going to talk about the Organization of Afro-American Unity, what it is, what it stands for, and where it came from, where the idea of the Afro-American Unity Organization came from. Malcolm started this organization, and he was given this idea by way of what he observed when he went on his Hajj, when he traveled to Africa and noticed the workings of a group known as, slightly different name, but instead of Afro-American Organization for Unity, it's called the Organization of African Unity, which was started by a man by the name of Kwame Nkrumah. Malcolm was taking examples from Kwame Nkrumah. And if you don't know who Kwame Nkrumah is, stick around because I'm going to tell you. I told you a little bit about Fidel, but I'm going to tell you about Nkrumah also. We need allies. As long as you and I think that we can only get allies from the Bronx or allies, you know, from Uptown, the Grand Concourse, I mean, where you don't live. As long as you and I think that's the only source or area from which we can get allies, our source of allies are limited. But when we realize how large the earth is and how many people there are on it, and how closely they resemble us, then we can turn to them for some sort of aid or to form alliances. Then we'll make a little progress a little faster. Now, this is Brittman. The best and most numerous allies of American Negroes, in Malcolm's opinion, were to be found abroad. And that was where he placed his primary emphasis in that last year. He set out to convince black people in this country and Africans, Arabs, Asians, and Latin Americans that they have common interest in a common enemy. The international power structure is the common enemy of the African, the Arab, the Asian, and the Latin American. Who am I leaving out? Think about what I just said, man. So notice how Malcolm X is characterized and considered to be the force, the figure that reinvigorated the Pan-African spirit. This is why Malcolm X is considered to be somewhat of an idol or an icon amongst the Pan-African theoreticians. Because Malcolm was a Pan-Africanist. Because, see, and this is when people say Malcolm began to change. Yes, he began to change because he said, man, listen, dog. My religion is my religion. Set that aside for a second. But when it comes to my politics, this is how I'm moving. Malcolm became more secular in that regard because, of course, he wanted to build with non-Muslims who, in fact, had a beef with the international power structure. So the Organization of Afro-American Unity, let me briefly describe this, was a Pan-Africanist organization founded by Malcolm X in 1964. The OAAU was modeled on the Organization of African Unity, which had impressed Malcolm X during his visit to Africa in April, end of May in 1964. Now, what is the Organization of African Unity? I'm going to give you a brief description. The Organization of African Unity was an intergovernmental organization established on May 25th, 1963 in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, with 32 signatory governments. One of the main heads of the OAU's establishment was Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana. Well, he was president of Ghana until Kwame Nkrumah was overthrown in a violent coup in 1966. He wasn't president at the time, but he was overthrown while out of the country. But why was Kwame Nkrumah overthrown? We'll get to that. But let's talk a little bit about who Kwame Nkrumah was. He was a baptized Roman Catholic. He spent 9 years at a Roman Catholic elementary school nearby in half a centi. Don't know exactly what that is. I'm assuming it's in Ghana somewhere. After graduation from Akamoto College in 1930, he started his career as a teacher at a Roman Catholic junior school in Alameda and Axiom and at a seminary. So Kwame Nkrumah started out as a teacher. It's funny how this happens because, see, all of these revolutionaries that y'all cling to, let me shatter the mold on a lot of this shit. Because once again, you know, Malcolm bought into the hype. Well, I'm telling y'all so that y'all don't buy into that same hype. Because you ever wonder why Fidel Castro said, well, all this talk about Afro-Cubans, you look at Fidel Castro, right? He off-white. He a pale man, right? His father was a Spaniard. He was a first-generation Cuban. His father, I believe, was Spanish. His father was given favor by the Cuban government. His father provided Fidel Castro and his siblings with a middle to upper middle class upbringing. Fidel Castro, matter of fact, his prowess in baseball was so phenomenal and legendary that many believe and suspect that had Fidel Castro wanted to pursue it, he could have been a Major League Baseball player. That's how good of an athlete he was. He attended numerous boarding and private schools. Fidel Castro was a learned man. He was a man of privilege and prestige who chose the path of a revolutionary because he was from the intelligentsia. Same thing with every single solitary, almost every communist revolutionary you can think of. Vladimir Lenin, he was the man who led the first a country in the world that was built up solely based upon the teachings of Karl Marx, right? The Soviet Union became the Soviet Union in 1917 Russian Revolution. Well, Vladimir Lenin, he studied law. He was a prolific writer. He was a law scholar. He was a legal philosopher. Pol Pot, the leader of the Khmer Rouge, which I may do another video on Pol Pot, the Cambodian communist. He was given a scholarship to study electrical engineering in France, where he picked up Marxism and he would come back and teach it to the peoples of Cambodia. He learned Marxism from French intellectuals in Europe. Ho Chi Minh, the leader of the communist regime in North Vietnam, was also a learned man. All of these men they ain't come from no gutter. You did. You believe what they say. Pol Pot had a middle class upbringing. Ho Chi Minh, middle class upbringing, beyond middle class upbringing. They rebelled against their privilege because they didn't want that. They wanted to struggle. That's the path they chose. They didn't have to, but that's the path they chose. And you can say, well, they took up a righteous cause. Well, you can make the case that they took up a righteous cause. That's your opinion. But I'm simply saying, don't fall for the hype. Don't fall for the hype. These men are not who you thought they were. Same with Nkrumah, and I'm gonna go on. Increasingly drawn to politics, Nkrumah decided to pursue further studies in the United States. Oh my God, the motherfucker came to the U.S. to study. He entered Lincoln University in Pennsylvania in 1935, and after graduating in 1939, he obtained a master's degree from Lincoln and from the University of Pennsylvania. The University of Pennsylvania. University of Pennsylvania, I think that's the Ivy League school, if memory serves me correctly. We ain't talking about Penn State. We talking about the University of Pennsylvania. He studied, guess what he studied now? He studied literature of socialism. He studied the literature of socialism, notably Karl Marx and Vladimir Lenin, and of nationalism, especially, dig this here, guess who else he studied? Especially, it says, Marcus Garvey, the Black American leader of the 1920s. Eventually, Nkrumah came to describe himself as a non-denominational Christian and a Marxist socialist. So when y'all running around, or should I say, when you looking at the African continent today, you blame the Organization of African Unity that was led by Kwame Nkrumah. I've said this 1,000 times, and this is why I'm going into it now. This is why I'm breaking this down. Because the plight of a lot of African countries have nothing at all to do with the legacy of colonialism, just like your condition, black folk, has nothing to do with the legacy of slavery. It has everything to do with the ideology and the worldview that you embrace today. Africa destroyed itself because Africa went full-blown socialist after the various nationalist revolutions that threw off their colonial rulers. As a matter of fact, it was so bad, you see, because many of the European empires said, well, what we'll do is we will create a transitional government, right, to show you all how to maintain and how to manage the society based upon what we've set up. Because, ladies and gentlemen, even after right? The Afrikaner regime abandoned South Africa when apartheid was over. In many respects, South Africa got worse. Why? Because going back to what I said earlier in this talk, in this discussion, in this oral dissertation, things can go from bad to worse. A lot of these African countries had a higher standard of living, health, food, economy, riches, wealth, lifespan was longer under their colonial masters than otherwise would be once their own kind seized the reins of power because they didn't know how to run government. Now, check this out. And I'm not saying some of the consequences of colonialism played a huge role in that, because when you look at a lot of the political territories that were carved up, it was totally arbitrary. And a lot of, here's the thing, you all, what you don't consider. A lot of these countries, whether it be Zimbabwe, whether it be Rhodesia, whatever, all these countries, they were now countries that had to find a homogeneous identity around which to gather. But a lot of times they were countries that were comprised of a bunch of warring tribes that had never gotten along. You had relative peace, and I know the imperial powers did some brutal the Dutch. My God, they were among some of the most brutal colonialists. I'm not whitewashing it, but what I'm saying is there was brutality and intertribal warfare going on before the colonies were set up. What happened was, once the European powers left, those tribes got back to fighting with each other over who would rule the roost. It's like the pigs and Animal Farm. Once the Europeans left, all hell broke loose because they went back to doing the same shit they had been doing, because while the European colonial powers were there, they had the military might and the cultural might to referee all that bull. No, y'all ain't doing that, motherfucker. This is a British colony. So you are all British subjects. I don't give a fuck what tribe you from, who this, who that. No. Y'all all the same. So when it came to African nationalism, this quest to figure out what Ghana would be, they went back to beefing the same way they had always been beefing. And many of the African leaders and revolutionaries, they didn't want a transitional government. They say, get the fuck out, leave now. And the Europeans said, I'm warning you, if we leave y'all now to your own devices, all hell gonna break loose. And they didn't listen. What happened was with Kwame, Nkrumah busied himself with the ideological education of the new generation of black African political activists. Meanwhile, the economic crisis in Ghana worsened and shortages of foodstuff and other goods became chronic. On February 24th, 1966, while Nkrumah was visiting Beijing, of course, why wouldn't he go to Beijing, right? We know, shit, Beijing. He probably went to go see Mao Zedong right alongside W.E.B. Du Bois. They were probably all there together. The army and police in Ghana seized power. Returning to West Africa, Nkrumah found himself in Guinea, where he spent the remainder of his life, where he died of cancer in Bucharest in 1972. See, these are the kind of men that Malcolm was building with. He was building an international coalition that was predicated and founded upon the teachings and the philosophies of Karl Marx. Everything that glitters is not gold. Once again, this is the death series. Malcolm already died once, but I come here to kill his legacy, because some of y'all have just completely lost your minds. Believe anything that anybody tells you without even beginning to do any research about it whatsoever. And we've been singing the same song over the past 100 years, going all the way back to Marcus Garvey in the 1920s. You tell me what kind of liberation we of black people have ever seen in over 100 years, but yet they still keep singing this same song. Let's read what Kwame Nkrumah wrote in 1967. He was exiled at the time. This is a paper at an African seminar held in Cairo. The title, Problems of Peace and Socialism. This is Nkrumah. The term socialism has become a necessity in the platform, diction, and political writings of African leaders. It is a term which unifies us in the recognition that the restoration of African humanist and egalitarian principles of society calls for socialism. All of us, therefore, even though pursuing widely contrasting policies in the task of reconstructing our various nation states, still use socialism to describe our respective efforts. Africa is suffering due to the legacy of colonialism, right? I got it. It's the white man, right? No, the white man showed you how to build a prosperous nation, how to build a prosperous society. And you flung it off to the side because you looked at it as though, yes, it's coming from the white man. It's not coming from the white man. It's coming from a man who just so happens to be white. Why are you throwing out the baby with the bathwater? Don't you want freedom? Don't you like freedom? No, you would rather be a socialist. Why? Because the white man gave you the concept of individualism and capitalism, and you don't want it because the white man is the one that gave it to you. But what's the alternative? Socialism? Oh, you want that because the black man is going to give you that. Does that make me a sellout and a coon and etc.? I'll be that, and I'll wear that shit proudly. You ain't hurting my feelings. I don't give a damn what you say. I'm not a fool. It is interesting to recall that before the split in the Second International, Marxism was almost indistinguishable from social democracy. Indeed, the German Social Democracy Party was more or less the guardian of the doctrine of Marxism. So here, Kwame Nkrumah is saying that the Nazi Party was were the guardians of the doctrine of Marxism. But once again, Hitler is a right winger. I talked about it in my last upload. Y'all check that one out. And both Marx and Engels supported the party. Lenin, too, became a member of the Social Democratic Party. After the breakup of the Second International, however, the meaning of the term social democracy altered, and it became possible to draw a real distinction between socialism and social democracy. And that's when, the whole communist and democratic socialism and this, and then Vladimir Lenin would take the term communist and apply it because he was the communist, the Bolshevik, the legacy of the Russian Revolution. They were the true curators of Marx's vision and his legacy. And the social democrats in other parts of Europe, they were betraying Marx's vision. And that's when, we saw, for example, what happened in Spain, for example, with the Spanish Civil War. You pretty much had that going on. And African political leaders and writers used the term African socialism in order to label the concrete forms that socialism might assume in Africa, but the realities of the diverse and irreconcilable social, political, and economic policies being pursued by African states today have made the term African socialism meaningless and irrelevant. It appears to be much more closely associated with anthropology than with political economy. African socialism has now come to acquire some of its greatest publicists in Europe and North America. Of course, the West. We love it. We love to play around with people's lives. Our Western intellectuals, they love it. Precisely because of its predominant anthropological charm. Its foreign publicists include not only the surviving social democrats of Europe and North America, but other intellectuals and liberals who themselves are steeped in the ideology of social democracy. Chuck, why you vote Republican? Why are you Republican? Why? Because I believe in republicanism. I believe that this country should remain a constitutional representative republic and not a democracy. Because our society, our system was not set up to be a democracy, which is mob rule. Mob rule is tyranny. And our founders understood that human beings get swept up in their passions. And there are certain unalienable rights that all human beings are born with that cannot be taken away can't be taken away by a majority. And I want to get to the last bit because Kwame Nkrumah goes on to talk about how Africa and its and mind you, Kwame Nkrumah was such a key figure in the Marxist movement at the time that there was because you hear the term like Leninism. Leninism was its own type of Marxism. Maoism is its own type of Marxism, right? Nkrumah, he had his own, this kind of African socialism became known as Nkrumahism, which is another subset of the Marxist doctrine. Y'all know who Dr. John Henry Clark is. I remember Dr. John Henry Clark saying in one of his lectures, he was talking about socialism in one of his lectures, and he said that the white man stole the idea of socialism from the black man because Africa was a socialist society before the white man had even heard of it or had even coined the term. Well, Kwame Nkrumah says the same thing. Socialism is not spontaneous. It does not arrive of itself. It has abating principles according to which the major means of production and distribution ought to be socialized if exploitation of the many by the few is to be prevented. If this is so, egalitarianism in the economy is to be protected. Socialist countries in Africa may differ in this or that detail of their policies, but such differences themselves ought to be arbitrary or subject to a varying of tastes. They must be scientifically explained as necessities arising from differences in the particular circumstances of the countries themselves. There is only one way of achieving socialism, Kwame says, by the devising of policies aimed at the general socialist goals, each of which in its particular form from the specific circumstances of a particular state at a definite political period. Socialism depends on dialectical and historical materialism. Oh my God. Chuck, man, that's why everything got to be about comedy? Why you keep going back to that? I'm showing you why. Upon the view that there is only one nature, subject to all its manifestations, to natural laws, and that human society is in this sense part of nature, subject to its own laws and development. So that's just a little bit of Kwame Nkrumah's doctrine, a little bit of his outlook on life, politics, and economics. And you wonder why Africa still struggles. You wonder why Black America still struggles. And I'm going to end this with this, bring it back full circle to Malcolm X. So that was Malcolm X at the end of his life. Malcolm X was a devout Marxist. I'm going to read these words. I'm going back to The Last Year of Malcolm X by George Brittman, and that will conclude this particular presentation. Go back. On the basis of his own experience and observation, he had come to believe, as Marxists believes, that Negroes need and will find dependable allies among certain whites. But like most Americans who become radical in the 1960s and 1950s, when the labor movement remained in the grip of conservative or reactionary bureaucrats, he did not share the belief of the Marxists that the working class, including a decisive section of the white workers as well as of the black workers, will play a leading role in the alliance that will end both racism and capitalism. So now you got two splits. You got labor and you got race. So we see in Malcolm in the 1960s, right, the burgeoning in the beginning of identity politics and intersectionality. What's more important, class or race, labor or racial issues? Because, yeah, poor whites may have a lot in common, or working class whites may have a lot in common with working class blacks, but can we depend on working class whites to be our allies? Malcolm didn't think so, but he changed when he became Sunni. Malcolm, this is Brittman, was pro-socialist in the last year of his life. But, this is according to Brittman, and I disagree with him about to read, but not yet a Marxist. Why was Malcolm not yet a Marxist? Because Malcolm didn't believe that racial lines could be crossed for the sake of doing away with, going back earlier to what I read, with the international power structure. He saw that white workers, only as they were politically immature, lacking in independence, blinded by prejudice, and not as they might or would become under different conditions. He saw and said that the capitalist world was in crisis and certain to experience stormy change, but he did not see that the American workers would be swept up in the crises and altered by it. And it goes on to talk about how white Americans would adapt to the changing capitalist landscape. But capitalism was, of course, a dying system. Malcolm X would say the same thing. So would W.E.B. Du Bois, etc., etc. So that's it, man. So Malcolm, ultimately, once again, he was a socialist. Two ways. Because your life represents your time and your time correlates exactly, in many instances, to what you've done as far as your labor. So your life has a price, time has a price, your labor has a price. Somebody has to have ownership of your time. Capitalism suggests that you, the producer, whether your labor is the only thing that you bring to the market, you negotiate with the market based upon, right, what you can extract from the arrangement. How much do you think your labor is worth? When you have a socialist society, man is not capable of determining the value of his own life. Malcolm was wrong. Kwame Nkrumah was wrong. Fidel Castro was wrong, and on and on and on. No matter how you slice it, no matter how much blackety black shit you dress it up in, and use race as the pretense for collectivism and an undermining of the individual and his rights, no matter what excuse you use, no matter if you are El Hajj, El Malik Shabazz, whatever his Muslim name, Arabic name was, no matter who you are, if that's what you believe, I don't care how talented of a demagogue you are, how talented a speaker you are, how witty and how charismatic you are, you will always be wrong. Check me on the next time, man. Peace.